Hello, I'm Wendy. Today we're painting snow in watercolour. It's an easy tutorial for beginners and could give you some ideas for Christmas cards or gifts. We're starting out with such an easy drawing here that I don't think anybody who doesn't like drawing is going to be really put off by this. It's just a distant hill with a couple of trees that are going to turn into silver birch trees. The lines that I've penciled in are where the shadows are going to start behind the snowy banks. And I suggest that you do them very, very lightly because at the end of this painting we're going to rub out the pencil lines, and I've made mine a little bit darker so that you can see, but at the end of the painting all the pencil lines are going to be rubbed out, so use a very soft pencil like a 2B and press on very, very lightly. The finished image is going to be about 8 by 6 inches. And I'm working on Bockingford watercolour paper, £140 weight, and not surface. This is one of the finished paintings that I did. I did several experimenting, and towards the end of the video I will show you some of the others and have a discussion about them. But this is the one that I'll be demonstrating. And just looking at it now, I thought I'd just run through some of the techniques that we'll be covering. Above the snowy hill we've got a sky, and we've got the suggestion of snow using salt. We've got the suggestion of snowfall, and as I'll be discussing, depending on the amount of water you've got there and the drying time and the thickness of the paint, you're going to get very different effects with salt, and no two are ever going to be the same, as you'll see looking at some of my other paintings at the end of the video. So we're going to tackle that nice, lovely, snowy sky. We're going to put on the banks using a sort of wet into wet technique with a hard edge and a soft edge. There's a little bit of dry brush work beneath the trees, and I tackled the bark on the silver birch trees by using a round brush on its side mainly, and then switched to a rigger to do a little bit of detailed work and to do the branches and the thinner twigs. I also used a rigger to do the bush in the foreground as well. So there's lots of watercolour techniques here, and especially if you're a beginner, I think you'll find this very useful. Well, I hope so. I have painted silver birch before, and I'll give you a link to those videos in the description box below. For this painting I used a very, very dilute wash of ultramarine with a little bit of light red in it to give it a sort of purpley colour. If you don't have light red, then one of your reds, but I kept it mainly on the sort of neutral side. And for this painting I didn't use masking fluid to mask out the silver birch. You could do that, and if you follow my channel you know I'm quite a fan of masking fluid, but you didn't need it on this one. You can paint around it, you've only got the two shapes. I would suggest that you make sure you've got the same colour and the same tone on either side of the shape. It means that it looks as if those two trees are in front of the background. If you get a sudden difference between tone and colour, then it can look wrong and the eye won't read it properly. So just make sure that you're doing that. It's up to you how dark you make the sky, and this is why I was experimenting, because I did several of these and they all turned out very differently. Some were a bit darker than others. And again, I wouldn't make it too wet, but you do need to have a wet into wet approach here, or when you start putting the salt on it's not going to work. So we've got a little bit of a darker tone at the top here, just a bit more blue with the mix. I use table salt, just ordinary table salt for the sprinkling here, and I know people do have problems with this. What I suggest is that if you are new to this, then do a few test areas before you put it on your painting. But what I suggest is once you start putting the salt on, look at it and see if it's immediately starting an effect, and then you probably know that you've got the right conditions for it. I think you can see here that the salt immediately has started soaking up the paint, and this is what you want to see. If it's very, very wet, it will soak up a lot of the water, and you'll get a sort of a blizzardy effect that can look quite nice. If the paint's a bit drier, then the salt won't soak up as much and you might get individual snowflakes on there, and sometimes you'll get a sort of mix of the two. You do need to leave it at this stage until the salt has soaked up as much as it's going to do, and that everything is totally dry. If you've got any salt left on at the end, then just brush it off. If you've found, unfortunately, you're having no effects at all, then you're not going to get anything else happening. So you could either start again or just continue painting your picture with a plain sky. So this is what I got with the level of wetness on this particular wash. It's a little bit blizzardy, but quite interesting. Now, while this is drying, instead of just leaving it, you could be doing the shadows on the front. These snowbanks, they've got a hard edge on the bottom, and then as they sort of come up and over, then they're going to soften. And so you can see what I'm doing here. I've put on one layer of paint, and then I'm washing the brush with clean water and dragging some of that upwards, washing the brush again and dragging the paint up again. You have to drag up the clear water further than you think so that you don't have a hard line across the top. This is another one that I'm doing here, just a smaller one that you can see using the same approach. And this furthest one now I'm tackling in the same way and taking it behind the tree, so it's a little bit trickier, but just working it in the same way, putting on the first layer very wet. You don't want that dry, you don't want the top edge of that to dry, because you want to clean your brush, dry it off a little bit, pull up some of the paint, and work very, very quickly, work as quickly as you can here, and then wash the brush again, and then pull that remaining bit of paint up, and that should be a soft edge. So you have a hard edge at the bottom and a soft edge at the top. You could add a little bit of salt if you wanted to these shadows as well. You'd have to do it at the stage when it's still wet, and you might get some nice effects, salt effects in the shadows to match the effects that you've got in the sky. When everything's dry, then you want to have a start on painting the silver birch. There's lots of ways of painting silver birch, and for this particular painting I used a sideways brush stroke, but I started off putting just a tiny little bit of a warm burnt sienna on there and let it dry. I used a fairly stiff mix here of burnt sienna with a bit of ultramarine to give a sort of neutrally warm colour for the bark. And as you can see, I'm just pulling it, it's a sort of dry brush mark, pulling it across. And I like to keep one of the sides as if it's in shadow. So here, the left-hand side, I've got darker, and then pulling it across the tree trunk. And I think it gives quite a nice effect. And as you can see here, I'm working a little bit wet into wet and adding some little darker marks on the left-hand side. I'm not being terribly particular, and as I said, there's lots of ways of painting silver birch. There is a link in the description box to two of my videos where I used a different technique for painting the silver birch, so you might want to have a look at those. I'm just adding a few darks here and there to add some variety to the bark, using a stronger mix of the burnt sienna and the ultramarine to do this. I've speeded up the rigger work here ×2 because it can get a little bit samey putting these branches on. You don't want to overdo it with these, you don't want to put too many on. And I think, as you can see, where they're coming out from the trunk, then I put a little bit of extra dark in there so they look as if they're anchored, and have some of the small branches overlapping as well. So the one on the left, I've got I've got that branch overlapping. That always works quite well. And my mix here, again, it's the ultramarine and burnt sienna, quite dark. I think you do want it dark here. If you find you've done it too light when you come to look at it at the end of this stage, then you can always darken it. You can go in with some darker paint. As I think you'll see I do once I've done the branches, then I might go back into the bark and add a few bits and pieces there, a few dots as I do to make the whole thing a little bit random in places, give it a bit more life rather than being too considered. That's the way I paint. I'm quite a loose painter. You can have a look, find some, you'll find some other ways of painting the silver birch bark in a couple of my other videos, and I'll link them in the description box. Adding a little bit more warmth to the painting here by using some dry brush work and some burnt sienna to put a few grasses below the tree trunks. And an extra bit of rigger work for some twigs growing below the tree trunks. At this stage I like to put a bit of a mount around the painting just to see how it's progressing. I felt I'd put the tree a little bit too far to the left. I'd left too much of the picture with nothing much happening over to the right hand side, and I decided to make it more of a squarer format. It's very subjective. You may or may not agree. You may think it would have worked all right leaving it the dimensions that I did, but that's what I decided at the time. There's no rights and wrongs, and I just put in a few marks to guide me to where to put a little bush or some twigs at the front. I thought I'd put this in because it would add some depth to the painting and some interest. So this would be the foreground, the silver birch in the middle ground, and the distance would be the hill. And a picture always works really well if you've got those three planes in it. You don't always have to put them in. You could do studies with just one or two things, but for this painting I thought I'd do this, and did a very loose sort of bush in the front and a few bits of grass or a few twigs sticking out of the ground. I finished the painting off by putting a few almost raw sienna, neat raw sienna leaves underneath the tree and on the foreground bush. The remains of autumn leaves, I think you could call them, that added some of the orange and the warmth in the picture. And I think it contrasts nicely with the purpley blues. So I don't know what you think. I don't know whether you think it works better as it was or whether it worked better as a more of a square format. Difficult to tell, I think, isn't it? I can't really make my mind up. It's not essential, but if you wanted to, you could always use a bit of opaque white to put some snow along the thin branches there on the trees, which I think can look quite effective. I'm using here Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white, and there's a link in the description. You can use white gouache, but I find the bleed proof white, although it is quite expensive, it does last a long time and is very opaque, and I would recommend it. As I said, there is a link in the description box. This is a new jar, and I find as it gets a little bit older, then you might need a skewer or a small stick or something just to mix it before you use it, because it can go a little bit thick. And you may find as it gets older you need to dilute it a little bit as well. But I think it's quite effective, as you can see here, putting just the suggestion of some snow on some of the branches. These are three paintings that I did then. This was the demonstration painting with a very busy, blizzardy sky. This one was a little more minimalist with lighter tones in the sky, but I still think it worked very well. It gave some interest in there, and the colours were the same that I used on the demonstration painting. A different format here and more sky. And you can see the effects of the salt here. We've got more of the individual snowflakes, so the paint was obviously drier than the previous two, and I think that worked really nicely. I hope you all enjoyed watching the video and realised that quite a complicated painting, when you first look at it, can be broken down into individual stages. And even as a beginner, you can tackle these stages and you can end up with a really nice painting. You've just got to be a bit brave and experimental, and don't get too focused on one painting. Do a few and experiment. You can always post your paintings on my Facebook page, and there's a link in the description. I do like to see them. That's all for now. I will probably be painting another snow scene in the near future, so do subscribe to my channel if you enjoy what I do and you feel you get some benefit from it. Bye for now.